We sink slowly into the sweet darkness now, listening only to the sound of burning wood, the oldest sound in the world, a slow comfort. Feel the heat, a gentle breath against your cheek, a soft, mesmerizing pulse of golden light. The fire is breathing, in and out, in and out. A deep, soft crackle, a whispering sigh. The wood grain opens, releasing its captive scent of smoke and hickory, and silent sleeping history. The darkness beyond the circle of light is vast, but here we are safe, suspended in this glow. The orange embers shimmer like scattered jewels. Warmth spreading through your body, your mind. Let the light hold you, still and heavy and calm. I am Nasrallah, and this low fire is our guide. This is YTChronicle, where we seek the massive stories, the deep forgotten echoes, waiting patiently for us. Tonight we look at courage that spread like wildfire, a single spark igniting a massive network of light. We speak of the famous ride of Paul Revere, but the fire shows us the truth, the deeper picture. It was never just one horseman racing through the black. It was a web of commitment, spun across the sleeping land, a synchronized ballet of urgent whispers and hoofbeats. The night was April the 18th, 1775. The air sharp and cold, still holding the chill of winter. Boston lay tense, restless under British occupation. The stored colonial arms, the powder, the cannons, waited precariously in the towns of Concord and Worcester. The plan was simple for the British: silence and speed, to seize the supplies before the colonists could wake. But the colonists were already awake, already waiting. They knew the danger. They had watchers planted everywhere: tavern owners, ferrymen, stable hands, weavers, ordinary people holding secret duty. In the dark, the signal lanterns flashed "To if by sea," they cried, from the spire of the Old North Church. High above the masts, a tiny flame of defiance against the overwhelming night. That signal light was the starting gun for revolution. Paul Revere was one messenger, a crucial artery, galloping west toward Lexington, spreading the warning. But he was only one link in a massive hidden chain, a system of trust built brick by whispered brick. William Dawes rode another road, circling south. Samuel Prescott joined them later, a trusted local physician. They were the famous names caught in the historical flash, but countless others rode that same essential warning. Imagine the other riders, the ones without monuments, the farmer roused from sleep by a frantic low knock, the militiaman instantly saddling his aging mare. They took the warning, carried it 2 miles or 3 to the next farm, to the next crossroads, to the next village, then quietly disappeared back into their silent lives, their job done, their name forgotten by the next sunrise. They rode in shifts, passing the vital message like a torch, a massive, slow wave of alarm rippling across the whole colony, from town meeting halls to remote, lonely homesteads, their horses steaming in the cold midnight air. Their only goal: to keep the light moving forward, to ensure that every patriot, every fighting man knew the regulars are out, the regulars are moving now. The wood breathes slow, deep fire breaths, sending sparks high up to the dark sky. Now we settle deeper into this moment of heat and history, letting the flames paint shadows on our memory walls. Tonight, we listen for the hoofbeats, not just of one famous rider, but of a hidden secret network long forgotten, a tapestry woven in fear and revolutionary hope under the crisp, cold air of an April night 250 years ago. Imagine the chill of 1775. Boston Harbor was a silent black mirror, reflecting the faint flickering light of whale oil lamps from the British ships, moored tightly like sleeping giants. The air tasted of salt and cold, damp wood smoke, and that pervasive underlying dread that clings to cities under occupation. The narrow, cobbled streets were slick with the residue of a long New England winter retreating slowly. The British garrison, known simply as the Regulars, in their brilliant scarlet coats and heavy boots patrolled the alleys, their metallic voices echoing too loudly in the pre-dawn stillness. We must remember that Boston was a cage, a powder keg waiting for the smallest spark to ignite the entire continent. The tension was a physical thing, a tightness in the chest of every patriot sleeping lightly behind shuttered windows, listening for the sign, listening for the signal. These patriots were the Sons of Liberty, a quiet, dedicated brotherhood that met in clandestine locations, whispering their plans over dark, strong ale, or pretending to discuss farming strategy in dusty taverns. They knew their freedom was an illusion held hostage by the thousands of occupying soldiers. They had established an intelligence system so meticulously organized that it rivaled the British military itself. They needed eyes, ears, and fast messengers, and they had cultivated them everywhere. Communication was everything in that fragile early rebellion. There were no instant messages, only whispers carried on the wind and coded signals hidden in plain sight. Revere was the flash of lightning, but the network was the slow, powerful movement of the storm clouds, gathering for days, weeks, months before this night. Men and women, tavern keepers, farmers, doctors, blacksmiths, every profession held a secret thread in this crucial tapestry. They had built routes, contingency plans, safe houses, relay points, all fueled by the absolute certainty that the Regulars would move soon to seize the colonial armories at Concord and Lexington. The firelight then, as now, offered solace, but in that time it was also a cover, a place where secrets could be exchanged, masked by the warmth and the seeming normalcy of a hearthside gathering. They had watched the high spire of the Old North Church, waiting for the crucial moment, waiting for the signal that would launch history. The signal itself was a masterpiece of simplicity and terror. The lighting of 2 lanterns in the belfry. One, if the British troops began their march by land, crossing Boston Neck. 2, if they chose the water route, rowing across the dark expanse of the Charles River. That sign was a beacon of terrible beauty, designed to pierce the absolute blackness of tyranny and signal the immediate danger to the watchers waiting across the water in Charlestown. We feel the chill of that harbor air now, even through the comforting warmth of our own modern fire. Imagine the biting cold clinging to the rider's cloak, the nervousness in their hands as they prepared their mounts and checked their pistols. The ride was not a glorious charge. It was a desperate race against capture, against discovery. Every shadow, a potential enemy. Every sound, a threat. We begin our journey not with Revere himself mounted in the saddle, but with the silent, selfless watchers, the ones who waited in the bell tower, risking their lives simply to hang 2 small glass lanterns high above the city. They are the ones who activate the clockwork of the American Revolution, the forgotten heroes who made Paul Revere's famed ride possible. They are the ones we honor tonight, as the flames rise slow and steady, casting their ancient glow upon our sleepy journey. We listen now for the quiet splashing of oars in the black water, as Revere prepares his escape from the occupied city. The horse breathes heavy, damp clouds in the April dark. He is not alone on the road, though. The history books only whisper his name. There is William Dawes, heading south on the slower path. The circuitous detour he travels, the neck of land, a quieter shadow, a necessary counterpoint to Revere's hurried drama. Dawes' path was muddy, long forgotten by the poets, a true sleepwalker's journey. He carries the same vital warning: the British are coming, the redcoats move. He slides past farms and silent sleeping villages, waking only the most trusted contacts. A whispered code, a handshake in the absolute dark, a lantern briefly flashed. This network was not built on fame or speed. It was built on redundancy, on trust, on quiet desperation. And then the third writer, Dr. Samuel Prescott, a physician riding home late from his sweetheart's house. He was the unexpected gift, the perfect messenger who stumbled into destiny near Lexington when Revere and Dawes were briefly stopped by the lurking British patrol. Prescott alone escaped. He leaped a fence. He rode through the swamp. He carried the warning deeper into Concord, a vital thread that historians often overlook. The sheer chance of a sleeping doctor on a lonely road. Imagine that moment. The three riders converging briefly near Lexington. 3 disparate lives, 3 different routes, 3 warnings carried. Revere, the celebrated craftsman. Dawes, the steady plotter. Prescott, the lucky physician. They were not heroes yet. They were simply links in a chain. A massive sleeping network. A web of urgency woven over years of tension and shared resentment. Listen closely to the fire. It speaks of those other riders too. The local messengers, the dozens of farmers and sons who took the warning further down the line. They moved on slower horses, on tired mules, on foot if necessary. The warning spread like wildfire, not from one brilliant spark, but from hundreds of small, deliberate embers. A boy riding bareback to his uncle's farm, a woman signaling across a dark creek with a blanket, a vast collaborative chorus of alarm and determination. They carried the knowledge that change was inevitable, that sleep must end. They rode not for glory, but for the heavy, quiet weight of duty. The history of that night is not a singular ride. It is a symphony of exhausted saddle leather and soft hooves, a story of quiet coordination, of the knowledge that freedom requires everyone to wake up. It demands a shared vigilance, and understanding that no single individual can carry the whole burden. Feel the heat of this fire now, pulling all those disparate energies back together. The collective memory of the light moving across the darkness. We only remember the brightest flare, the lantern in the steeple, the famous name. But the true story lies in the steady, quiet glow of every single farm lamp that night. The hundreds of tiny lights flickering on in sequence, stretching across the Massachusetts landscape. This flame remembers the names we never learned, the messengers who returned home unnoticed, the farmer who warned his neighbor, then simply went back to hoeing the next morning. The revolution was built not just on grand gestures, but on these quiet, profound acts of shared risk. The risk of carrying a message when capture meant ruin or death. And as the fire settles, now sinking into a deep, glowing red core, we let the familiar stories drift away. The noise, the fanfare, the bright flash of fame. And we begin to wonder about the deepest secrets carried on that night, about the messages that were perhaps never delivered, about the contents of the saddlebags of the quietest rider who turned back early. The network was so vast, so complex, so quickly executed. Did one of those forgotten riders carry something more than just a warning? A secret that settled deeper than the mud. On their boots, a hidden document perhaps, a whispered truth meant only for a select few, a mystery tucked away in the shadows of that crucial midnight ride. We leave the network now in the soft red light of this fire and wonder what else that long dark night concealed, a drifting secret waiting still in the sleepy shadows of the forest floor. The embers glow, deep red, deep slow, deep silent, and we drift with them, softly, softly, waiting for the next light. The deep red glow settled down, 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 into the powdered ash of the white pine. Logs, a low breathing light that barely stirred the sweet smoke, the smoke of history and deep ancient comfort, a silent warmth wrapping around your tired shoulders, a gentle friend in the vast, enormous darkness outside. this small circle of safe amber light. Hear the patient, soft hiss of sap burning away, the slow, steady crackle, a hypnotic rhythm, a primal, soothing sound, older than ships or stars. Just fire, just wood, just comfort, just sleep. We drift now backward, across the years, across the cool, still air, toward a different darkness. A spring night in colonial Massachusetts, April 1775. The air sharp and thin, carrying the distant smell of damp earth and coming rain. A night of profound, silent waiting, waiting for the signal, waiting for the necessary motion, waiting for the deep, inevitable alarm. A quiet country poised on the edge of a great, enormous, sudden change. The tale always tells of one singular, tireless, dedicated man, riding fast, but tonight we focus on the many, many others, the quiet, prepared machinery hidden beneath the famous name, the invisible, intricate network of steadfast hearts that made the famed ride even remotely possible, stables across the moon-washed landscape. Held saddled horses, already tense, already keyed to move. Stables tended by stable boys who knew the silence of a pending war. Servants and farmhands who had memorized the coded knocks, the secret low-voiced instructions, the urgent hidden routes. These were the true foundations, the unseen vigilant sleepers. Before the famous hoofbeats, before the legendary warnings, there was the preparation, the patient, meticulous planning of a secret civilian army. An alarm system built not of bells or horns, but of shared trust and silent understanding. Men like William Dawes and Dr. Samuel Prescott were simply two more essential spokes in this wide, quiet wheel. They held their own routes, their own desperate destinations, their own separate warnings to give. These riders were not celebrities or orators. They were simply farmers and mill workers, cobblers and blacksmiths, men and women who held the critical, tiny pieces of the vast revolutionary map, each responsible for 10 miles or 5 miles or even just 2 miles of crucial, vital warning. A relay race of whispered caution across the sleeping towns, across the frost-silvered meadows, a steady transmission of terror and necessity, linking Concord and Lexington, and the hundreds of small, silent villages dreaming. Unaware of the approaching boots, the network was a living, breathing map of shared anxiety, a collective heartbeat beating faster than any solitary hoofbeat, 1,000 small lanterns being lit one after the other across the shadowed fields, a slow-motion cascade of necessary alarm that began long before Paul Revere even touched his saddle, long before the dark water was crossed. Think of the boat rowers, the ones who moved the riders under the heavy shadow of the British warships, the silent, rhythmic dipping of the oars, the effort of muscle against the cold black current. These nameless rowers were the first critical link, the unseen hands pushing fate forward. Think of the women who waited in the kitchens, their windows unlit, their doors closed, but their eyes wide open, watching for the flicker of signal from the Old North Church. The legendary 2 if by sea signal was not just for Revere, it was for everyone, poised to run, everyone ready to wake their neighbors, everyone ready to saddle the next available horse in the chain. A profound communal awareness, a deep sense of shared danger, binding the whole vast region in a single shared breath. A moment of complete and total silent preparedness, waiting only for the urgent, cold, dark call to action that would change everything forever. The fire breathes slow, deep breaths now, a low red heart beating against the cool night air. Feel the cedar smoke rise, a gentle, comforting curtain drifting upward into the black velvet sky. Your eyelids feel heavy, soft weighted blankets of rest settling over them. The gentle hiss and pop of a dying log reminds you that history is happening right here, right now, near this very warmth, this ancient ritual of light against the darkness we lean closer into. The flickering dance of the flames, imagining the cold April winds whipping across the Massachusetts countryside. That historical setting, that stage upon which the revolution began, was utterly unlike the suburban landscape we know today. Picture the landscape not manicured, but rougher, darker, dense woods pressing close to narrow dirt tracks. These villages of Lexington and Concord were tiny constellations of wooden houses huddled around a sparse green or common ground. The roads were treacherous, deep ruts of freezing mud, slowing any traveler, even the swiftest horseman. The moon that night was crucial for visibility, but the shadows were fast, stretching out like grasping hands across the sleeping settlements. Every sound was amplified. Every creak of leather, every nervous cough of a horse seemed to cut through the quiet of that tense spring night. The colonial settlements themselves were deeply interwoven, economically and socially, but they were physically separated by miles of wilderness or open farmland. Communication was everything, and the intelligence network established by the Sons of Liberty was a marvel of revolutionary logistics. They had designated safe houses, predetermined signals, and relay points set up days, weeks in advance. Revere was the spark, but the tinder was everywhere. Waiting. The historical geography mandated multiple writers, because if one was caught, the message still had to travel. William Dawes took a longer, quieter southern route, designed specifically to avoid the most obvious British patrols, slipping through Roxbury and into the dark expanse of the countryside. He was the quiet professional, the antithesis of the famous dashing hero, but equally vital. His mission was to confirm the movement of the troops and to activate the network in the southern quadrant. Then there was the essential role of the local committees of safety. These were the farmers and tradesmen who risked everything, storing gunpowder secretly, hiding cannonballs beneath hay bales, burying muskets in their potato patches. The historical setting meant that the British regulars could appear at any moment without warning, searching homes, seizing property, imposing martial law. The colonists lived on edge, knowing that the simple possession of arms could lead to imprisonment or worse. The tension was a physical thing, a thin electrical charge hanging in the air between every farmhouse, every tavern, every church steeple. Because every loyalist watched every patriot, and every patriot knew they were watched. The entire colony was a tightly wound spring, waiting for the signal, waiting for the snap. The alarm was not just a shout, it was a sequence of coded knocks on farmhouse doors. Lanterns hung high in windows, prearranged signals known only to the Sons of Liberty. And then the heavy iron church bells, ringing, not for Sunday service, but ringing a terrible, persistent, urgent sound, telling every farmer, every blacksmith, every mill worker to drop their tools, gather their rifles, and meet on the common. Imagine the sound traveling across the fields, the dark woods absorbing the echoes, the fear and the resolve growing with every toll of the bell, the colonial air itself thick with the scent of rebellion and the approaching danger. This complex logistical dance required immense coordination and unwavering trust. Every person in the chain understood the gravity of their silence or their speed. Every designated messenger knew the terrain, every hidden path, every shortcut. Dr. Samuel Prescott, joining them later, was key. He was the local expert, a man who knew the back roads better than his own heartbeat. When Revere was captured, Prescott escaped, carrying the vital message forward, ensuring the network did not fail. Listen closely now to the quiet murmur of the fire, a sound that mimics the distant hoofbeats echoing faintly through the centuries. Feel the warmth of the coal bed radiating upward into your chest. a shield against the historical chill of that April night. The ashes fall softly, a gentle sighing sound, settling layer upon layer. We are safe here, wrapped in the history and the heat, allowing the deep, quiet safety of this moment to wash over us, letting the details fade slightly into the comfort of sleep. Knowing the network worked, knowing the alarm was sounded, knowing those forgotten riders carried the dawn of freedom on. Their weary saddlebags, we breathe slowly, deeply, in, out, letting the hypnotic crackle carry us further toward deep rest and deep sleep. The waiting was heavy, thick, like molasses, moving slow down the side of a wide glass jar. A soft weight pressing down on the shoulders of the silent riders, huddled in barns or near the shadowed edges of the forest. They were not the heroes of the midnight ride yet. They were only the invisible scaffolding, the framework that allowed the masterpiece to stand tall. Paul Revere knew his was vital, but he knew the message was fragile. A thin, whispered secret that could shatter if it traveled only one way, only one time. The bonfire keeps talking to us, its steady crackle pop, reminding us of the nervous energy, the suppressed adrenaline, the tight coiled springs of readiness in every hidden heart, waiting for that signal, that single flicker that would unleash the night and change everything. The quiet darkness swallowed sound so completely, the air felt frozen cold, biting at the fingertips. And then, across the wide, dark water of the Charles River, the lanterns finally appeared. They were two soft eyes opening in the blackness. Two small, glowing tears suspended high in the spire of the Old North Church, a sight so profoundly beautiful and terrifying it must have stopped the breath in a dozen throats. Two if by sea, the ancient instruction, the sacred promise fulfilled, a beacon burning against the overwhelming shadow. And instantly, the quiet patience evaporated, the network activated. Not just one rider, not just Paul, but the others. William Dawes, following a longer, more circuitous southern route, a necessary diversion designed to split the risk and confuse any British patrols. Dr. Samuel Prescott waiting further out, ready to catch the message and carry it deeper into Concord, the true hidden core of the system, the redundancy, the overlapping layers of defense against failure. Imagine the sudden shift from absolute stillness to frenetic, desperate movement. Saddles thrown onto waiting horses, bridles yanked tight, muffled farewells, maybe just a nod in the dark. The heavy thud of hooves accelerating out of the quiet village lanes, hitting the dusty, hard-packed earth. The sound muffled by the need for stealth and the vast, absorbent darkness of the New England night. Each rider carried the same profound weight, the future of a colony balanced. On the speed of their tired horse, the clarity of their voice, the sheer will to avoid the redcoat patrols. Each mile covered was a small victory against impossible odds. The message was simple yet monumental. The regulars are out. The warning carried by dozens of different tongues, spoken into the faces of tired farmers, sleeping militias, town elders demanding immediate action. We watch through the dancing firelight, the way the shadows stretch and shrink as the hoofs pound the road. Paul Revere was the spark, but the network was the slow-burning fuse, and many of those unknown messengers rode until their horses collapsed, miles past the central towns, carrying the alarm to the furthest reaches of the county, ensuring that when the moment of truth arrived, the Minutemen would not be surprised. They would be ready. They would be waiting, standing silent in the dawn light. The meticulous planning involved routes that snaked through hidden valleys and avoided every known British encampment. The riders did not simply gallop. They negotiated the darkness. They felt the road beneath them. They listened for the slightest metallic clink of a musket, or the sound of voices speaking with an unfamiliar accent, and the silence between those sounds was the most dangerous moment of all. A void where anything could lurk, where ambush was always waiting. the fate of the ride itself, the famous interception, the brief moment of capture that befell Revere, the momentary confusion when Dawes was thrown from his horse. All those dramatic moments often overshadow the quiet genius of the plan itself. The fact that even if Revere had failed entirely, the alarm would still have reached Concord, carried by Prescott or one of the many others. The network was built to survive failure, built on trust. Built on the low whispers shared around small, hidden fires, like the one we share tonight. A beautiful and complex web of quiet courage. One of the most mysterious and essential elements of the network were the unnamed relay points, the silent homes, the doors opened at midnight, the cold cups of water pressed into the hands of weary riders, the fresh horses already saddled and waiting in the stables. These were the people who risked everything without ever touching the glorious saddle of history. They were the quiet anchors of the revolutionary midnight, and when the sun finally rose, casting its pale, indifferent light over Lexington Green, the Minutemen stood ready, not because one man rode, but because dozens of hands and dozens of hooves, working in perfect, dangerous synchronicity, delivered the message, and the British marchers themselves were astonished, expecting to find sleeping farms, and instead finding a line of determined men facing the inevitable clash. The network had worked, but the question that always hangs heavy in the smoky air, the mystery that the embers whisper to the wind, is this: what happened to the rest of the message after the first wave? The ride was not just about Lexington or Concord, it was about alerting all of New England to the new war. The system stretched far beyond the Massachusetts Bay Colony. Who carried the word west into the hills of Worcester and north up the coastline toward New Hampshire, whose names are lost entirely to the turning of the calendars? Which quiet farmer or humble apprentice rode the lonely roads for days after Paul Revere was back at home safe, carrying the alarm into truly forgotten corners? The network did not cease functioning at dawn. It merely shifted its pace, becoming a softer whisper, a long traveling echo. And those echoes, those final riders that delivered the war to the wider world, remain forever shrouded in the deep, soft ash of history, a mystery waiting patiently for us to hear their story. A tale for another night, perhaps, when the fire glows just a little bit hotter. The fire breathes a low, deep sound, a slow, steady, sighing sound. It is the sound of time folding itself inward, the sound of wood becoming memory. And the embers, they hold a rich ruby warmth, a deep red glow, soft and steady behind your eyelids. Safe space, a quiet darkness illuminated only by this ancient breathing light. Tonight, we lean into the heart of the flame to find a secret story, a story we think we know, but only know the brightest flash, the single moment of light in the vast American darkness. We speak of Paul Revere and his ride, the thunder of one horse hoof on the midnight road. But that famous journey was never meant to be a solo flight. It was never meant to be a single heroic arc. It was a web, a network, a quiet conspiracy woven through the Massachusetts darkness, a secret understanding among farmers, among silversmiths, among physicians. Imagine the spring air of 1775. It is cool and damp with the coming thaw, and the tension in Boston is a thick cloak, a heavy, oppressive silence, ready to be torn. Dr. Joseph Warren, he was the hidden loom, the master planner, sitting quietly in the shadows, not needing the fame, only needing the successful whisper, the crucial warning to travel the miles. He knew the British Army was preparing to move towards Lexington, towards Concord, where the precious stores of gunpowder lay hidden. They would move by sea and by land, and the signal had to be redundant. It had to be sure. So the plan was not one lantern, but two, if they came by water, one, if by land. It was not one rider, but dozens. The system was complex, beautiful in its quiet urgency. We remember Revere, But we forget William Dawes, a tanner riding a slower horse, taking the dusty, winding Boston neck route, a quieter path, a necessary redundancy should Revere be captured. And we forget the men waiting on those distant church spires, the nameless watchmen standing vigil in cold night air, their eyes scanning the dark lines of the river, their minds sharp with purpose. They were the first lights in the chain, the forgotten link. Revere, he was the spark, yes, the primary runner, crossing the river by boat, his face lit by the single momentary flash of the lanterns hanging high in the old North Church steeple. 2 lanterns shining brightly, 2 signals that the king's forces were crossing the water to Cambridge, that they were coming by sea. It was a sign seen far beyond Boston. It was a message carried on the dark wind. Seen by men whose names are lost to the pages of history, whose only purpose was to see the light and then to run. They took that light, that urgency, and they turned it into physical motion, a movement of quiet hooves across the dew-wet fields, a rhythmic, soothing sound, now like the sound of this fire gently working the wood, like the slow pulse in your ear. They rode westward through the sleeping villages, through Medford, through Arlington, waking the militia captains one by one with a calm, careful whisper, not shouting the alarm, but planting the seed of urgency in the dark, fertile soil of the night. The true ride was not a sprint, but a slow spread, a ripple effect across the sleeping Commonwealth, a continuous chain of sound and shadow, and the knowledge that safety lay in silence and speed, not in grand pronouncements. Revere was stopped eventually by a British patrol, captured and questioned, and relieved of his horse. Yet the message lived on. The network continued. The network breathed, long after the famous writer was detained, long after the single celebrity moment was extinguished. The relay runners picked up the torch. The farmers, local boys who knew every twist of every road, every shadow, every sleeping dog. They were the essential sleepwalkers of history, moving quietly, ensuring the revolution would wake up just in time. Not in a blaze of glory, but in a slow, steady preparedness, sustained by shared trust and the knowledge that the smallest light can travel the farthest distance on the darkest night. The deep, glowing heart of the fire reminds us of those hidden roads, those shadowed networks that stretched out far beyond Boston's harbor, a clandestine geography built on trust and low whispers, and the frantic gallop of horses' hooves. Paul Revere was just one spark, one essential message carrier, but the system itself was vast and intricate, like roots spreading beneath the forest floor. Think of William Dawes riding south, following the older, longer route, the one deemed safer for its distance, his boots heavy, his cloak smelling of damp wool, and the nervous sweat of a man carrying the fate of settlements in his saddlebag. The fire listens to the phantom echo of Dawes's ride, a softer, more cautious approach than Revere's fiery dash. The wood shifts, settling with a deep sigh, a reminder that the world was asleep while this revolution was waking. A crucial distinction that most forget is that the alarm was never meant to be carried by just 1 or 2 heroes. It was a decentralized system designed precisely for failure protection. If Revere or Dawes were captured, the message would still move inland, carried by the secondary riders waiting patiently in taverns or hidden farmhouses, like minute hands ticking toward war. Imagine the Massachusetts countryside on that cold April night, 1775. The air was brittle with frost and anticipation. The farms lay dark and silent, rows of sleeping sentinels. But inside those simple wooden homes, tools were sharpened, muskets were oiled, powder horns were filled. The readiness was woven into the fabric of their lives. For years they had practiced drilling in the fields, training for this very sound, the sound of the alarm rider. The historical setting was not one of peace. It was a simmer, a slow boil, waiting for the signal. The light from the Old North Church lanterns, a fragile glow against the overwhelming dark. The smell of the night was damp earth and the distant, lingering scent of wood smoke from chimneys that had long since cooled. The moon, if it was visible, offered little comfort, casting stark angular shadows that played tricks on the eyes, turning bushes into marching ranks of redcoats. This readiness, this constant preparedness, is the key to understanding why the entire countryside mobilized so swiftly. The colonists weren't waiting for the British to arrive. They were waiting for the signal to start fighting the war they already knew was inevitable. It was a landscape marked by clandestine caches of supplies, buried flour barrels, hidden gunpowder stores, and meeting points disguised as church gatherings or sewing circles. The British officers believed they were entering a world of peaceful farmers, easily subdued, but they were riding into a carefully laid trap. The geography itself had been weaponized. Every stream, every thicket, every stone wall was known intimately by the colonial forces, a knowledge Revere and Dawes and the forgotten writers used to evade capture and push the message onward. The network extended far beyond Lexington and Concord, reaching into Sudbury, into Framingham, into countless small hamlets, where farmers knew only the rhythm of the seasons until that night. The riders were many, dozens perhaps, each taking a furlough of the alarm, a human chain of urgent necessity. Young men, old men, risking capture and the hangman's rope, carrying the news that the British regulars were moving out to seize the arms caches. This was not just a ride, it was the ignition of a massive relay race, where speed meant survival and silence meant tyranny. These messengers operated under the cloak of night, using back roads and cowpaths, knowing every twist of the land, every shortcut through the swamps. They were the true arteries of the rebellion, pumping the lifeblood of warning into the sleepy countryside. Their names are mostly lost to history, absorbed into the collective roar of revolution. The warmth you feel now beside this bonfire is the warmth those riders sought, the quick comfort before plunging back into the cold April air, carrying their terrible, wonderful news. They rode through the cold, demanding wakefulness from a world that craved sleep. But the fire remembers every frantic beat, every whispered password, every anxious glance over the shoulder. Settling deeper into your blanket, let the sound of the wood collapsing, the soft shh and crackle of the embers, be the distant sound of those unseen horses fading into the revolutionary night, a silent network forever preserved in the slow-burning story of the flame. Listen closely as the history melts into the dark. The sound drifted further, carried by the damp spring air, heavy with the scent of pine and rich earth. It was not just the sound of horses now, it was the sound of preparation, a deeper resonance vibrating through the valley floor, a symphony of fear and resolve. The main riders, the famous names, had done theirs. They had triggered the tripwire. But the wires themselves were handled by others, hundreds of hands. We have, forgotten, held the strands of the alarm, stretching them taut across the sleeping landscape. Imagine the second tier of riders, the unknown carriers, who received the message in places like Lexington and Groton, then immediately turned their exhausted mounts toward the west, toward the endless forest, toward the next isolated farmhouse. These were the riders of the interior, the silent logistics of revolution, riding through villages named for their loneliness, riding on paths where only deer usually wandered. Their mission was simple, relentless forward motion, until the next light was sparked, until the next door was pounded awake. They were riding toward the hearths, toward the slow-burning embers of colonial life, the places where the fire was still banked low for the night, waiting for morning to be reborn. And as the hoofbeats approached, the hearths responded, a sudden stirring in the ashes, A rush of air as the bellow was deployed, the red heart of the fire waking instantly to the sound of danger. The farmers and militiamen emerging from their warm beds saw the sudden glow on their kitchen walls, and they knew before the rider even spoke. The crackle of their own fire suddenly sounded like the dry whisper of history beginning. Listen to the sound of those homes, the sound of the wooden bowls being hastily filled with hard bread and salted pork, the heavy rustle of wool blankets being rolled up, the quiet click of a musket being taken down from the wall above the mantelpiece. The bonfires of war were still hours away, but the small, intimate fires of warning were everywhere now, tiny sparks of resistance flickering in windows across the hills. The damp night air held the warnings, making them travel farther, the wet lowlands echoing the desperate calls. A single horseman became 10, then 50, the alarm compounding itself through the darkest hours between midnight and dawn. There were women now working by the weak glow of tallow candles, their shadows stretching long and strange across the rough-hewn floorboards. They knew the network too. They were the supply lines, the quiet sustainers of the alarm, ensuring that when their husbands and sons rode out, they would not ride empty-handed. This network was ancient, built on shared loyalty and the deep kinship of the frontier, long before Revere or Dawes ever planned their route. It stretched invisibly into places we rarely remember, tiny hamlets near the Connecticut border, near the New Hampshire grants, forgotten corners where the call still had to travel further still, into the deepest silence. The message must reach the western villages. The communities near the Berkshires must hear it before the first light of day touches the mountains, before the British patrols can cut the wires. The final rider, the furthest carrier of the night, is heading now toward a place where the air is thinner and colder, a place where the settlers built their homes far from the main road, depending entirely on their distant neighbors. For news of the world, the horse labors up a final steep incline, the breathing harsh and heavy, the sound of the hoofbeats finally beginning to fade into the dense wilderness ahead. The fire has spread now beyond human control, a self-propagating rumor racing across the vast black map of Massachusetts, and the final light we see is the flickering of a single candle in a cabin window, far, far away in the western dark, waiting for the sound that might never arrive. A final mystery in the spreading cold morning. The deep orange glow settles now, a velvet curtain. Drawn across the night, a comforting, heavy blanket, woven from ancient warmth, and the slow, gentle sound of pine pitch weeping onto the stones. A steady, soft sizzle, a hush against the great dark silence outside, where the old world waits and sleeps. A sound that pulls your focus inward, always inward, where the stories rest and breathe, waiting for the firelight to tell them true and slow and soft as dust settling. We speak tonight not of the famous writer, the one whose name rings like a clean bell, but we speak instead of the invisible threads, the subterranean wire connecting every attic window, every hidden cellar, every anxious hearth. On that midnight of April 1775, when the signal lamps flickered in the North Church spire, a phantom message sent across the dark water. Paul Revere was magnificent. Yes, a silver tongue, a fast mount, a necessary flash of courage. But his ride was merely the centerpiece of a vast living clockwork, a secret, intricate network of riders you may never have heard of. Men and women who stood ready in the freezing shadow, ready to vanish down separate winding paths, each carrying a single piece of urgent sound. A whispered warning that the regulars were stirring, moving like shadows towards Lexington and Concord. Think of William Dawes, a quieter man, traveling the less fashionable southern route, away from the river, across the neck, an equally vital artery of the alarm, a redundancy built into the system, because the colonists knew the danger of putting all their hope on a single heroic figure. they understood that survival lies in diffusion, in scattering the message like seed across the broadest field of night. Imagine the farmers waiting in their barns, shivering perhaps with cold, or simply with the terrible weight of what was coming. Their horses saddled hours ago, tethered lightly, ready to bolt the moment the agreed-upon knock arrived, the coded signal that meant, "Go now, go fast, tell everyone the British are moving. Tell them by land or by sea, but just tell them." The deep breathing of the waiting animals mingling with the sound of the wind through the eaves, a hush that preceded the storm. It was not a solo effort. It was a massive breath drawn by an entire decentralized province, a coordinated effort, years in the making, a system of relays established by committees of safety months before the first shot, a plan to ensure that even if Revere were captured or Dawes were intercepted, the message would still leak out through the back roads, through the taverns, through the gossiping washerwomen, and the traveling preachers. The urgency was not the speed of one horse, but the fractal multiplication of speed. The way the warning fractured instantly into dozens of streams, flowing into Worcester, into Framingham, into the distant corners where militia captains slept unaware, waiting for a neighbor's frantic arrival, a breathless voice yelling the code word, the ancient sign that meant grab. "Your musket tonight. The long sleep ends tonight. Tonight we fight." These were the forgotten heroes, the quiet, swift feet, the unsung nerves of the American resistance. The men like Samuel Prescott, a doctor encountered late in the journey, who proved essential when Revere himself was stopped. A chance meeting under the cold gaze of the moon that saved the entire effort. The quiet doctor galloping onward, carrying the precious warning deep into the western towns, ensuring that Concord knew that the gunpowder stores were in peril, that the hour of decision had truly arrived, spreading the firelight of alert from hearth to distant hearth across the vast, dark tapestry of Massachusetts, a web of resistance woven in darkness. The cedar log settles deep now, a long, steady hiss that pulls your focus back to the heat, the core warmth of this place. Feel the heat pressing gently against your knees, a weight of safety, protecting us from the vast, cold colonial night outside. We watch the orange glow dance wildly across the rough plank floor of this old tavern, reflecting the untold stories of April 1775. We were speaking of the other lanterns, the shadow messengers of that crucial moment, a night where every mile of road, every colonial farmhouse became a node in a living alarm system. This ride was not a solo performance. It was a perfectly timed symphony of warnings, a network orchestrated by careful calculation and sheer courage. Imagine the small farmhouses tucked against the hillsides, barely visible in the cold, moonless dark, the chimney smoke mingling with the damp spring air. Every colonist, every trusted member, knew the code, the precise alert system, prepared long before Revere ever mounted his mare, Brown Beauty. They called it the Committee of Safety, an invisible web, linking the tense pressure cooker of Boston to the scattered, determined resistance in the countryside. Dr. Joseph Warren sat at the spider center, pulling the threads, knowing exactly who needed to be roused, who had the fastest horse, who knew the hidden cow paths through the swamps and dense thickets. He was the intelligence man, the heart of the resistance, sending out messengers in pairs and trios, ensuring redundancy so that if one rider fell, another would surely carry the vital message. Think of the smell of that time, the sharp tang of stored gunpowder beneath floorboards, the metallic scent of old muskets hidden in haylofts, the faint odor of tallow candles struggling against the overwhelming darkness. The roads were treacherous, deeply rutted by the sudden spring thaw, demanding incredible skill and sheer luck from those riders who risked broken bones and capture with every stride. mud splattered high on their coats, the chill mist clinging to the low valleys, making every hurried, frightened breath visible, a cloud in the cold air. They rode through towns like Woburn and Medford, towns now stirring violently in their sleep, roused by a frantic pounding fist on the shuttered window. A quick, urgent whispered, "Code, the regulars are coming out," was enough to send husbands grabbing their gear, wives wetting down linens for potential fire. The warning had to be specific, not just noise, but confirmation of troop numbers and direction, heading first toward Lexington to seize the leaders John Hancock and Samuel Adams, then onward to Concord to destroy the precious stores of cannons and ammunition. There was William Dawes, who took the longer southern route, less glamorous than Revere's sprint, but absolutely vital, circling around the British positions, ensuring the warning spread wide and true. And young Dr. Samuel Prescott, the steadfast hero who carried the news onward after Revere and Dawes were briefly detained by British patrols in Lincoln. Prescott was the medical man turned urgent messenger, escaping the capture, riding alone through the deepest of the night into Concord, ensuring that town had hours, not minutes, to hide the cash. These are the unseen heroes, the quiet farmers, the tavern keepers, the Minutemen grabbing their hunting pouches, their simple rifles, waiting for the inevitable clash. They are the network of preparedness, riding beneath the glow of that single fateful lantern, now fading slowly into the rhythmic hiss and pop of our own ancient fire. The logs shift one last time, settling the flames down into a deep bed of glowing ash. A perfect historical quiet descends over us now. A deep, slow, quiet peace that carries us toward sleep. The slow, heavy breath of the horses continued onward, away from that silent capture spot. A deep, shuddering exhale into the frosty air. William Dawes slipped around the edges of the fields, a phantom moving parallel to the main road, knowing instinctively where the militia captains lived, where the deep sleep of the farmers needed urgent interruption, and the fire crackled here beside us, a steady reminder of the small flame he carried in his chest, that frantic hope. He rode through Woburn and Lexington, spreading the word like seed cast over cold ground, and the message was simple: the regulars are marching. The slow thudding beat of the hooves becoming just another rhythm in the endless dark night, folding into the rustle of dry leaves along the stone walls, and the warmth of the fire here feels vast and protective, the wood shifting silently, sinking into itself, while out there, in 1775, the cold was absolute, biting the hands. The face, the edges of every thought. The network was a web of overlapping threads, and if one thread snapped, the others held taut. Dawes was tired, his horse stumbling slightly, but the mission was bigger than one man or one horse. It was the birth of an idea, whispered into the night. And we hear the soft hiss now, the pine pitch bubbling gently on the log, a low, mesmerizing sound, the ancient voice of the heat. Then there was Dr. Samuel Prescott, who truly carried the torch further than the others, a quiet, steady man who knew every curve of the path toward Concord, his knowledge not merely academic, but etched into the soles of his boots and the memory of his horse's gait. And he split away from the others after the encounter, pushing harder, pushing faster, a single shadow against the enormous, indifferent moonlight. Prescott moved through the sleeping villages, feeling the cold air rush past his ears, a low, continuous hum, and the message flowed out of him as he shouted it into the darkened farmhouse windows, a sound muffled by distance and the insulating layers of history, but we can almost feel the vibration. Now, in the deep silence, the echo catching in the shifting orange glow of our own peaceful fire. He knew the back roads, the hidden lanes, the river crossings that would confuse any British patrol. And the fear was a constant companion, a small, tight knot that only dissolved when he saw the first lights begin to flicker inside the houses. The response, immediate. the confirmation, undeniable, that the alarm was successful, the message received. He reached Concord, the last rider of that specific pivotal journey, delivering the final word before sunrise, and the great drum began to beat. Massive, slow pulse, telling everyone that the time for whispering was over. The time for preparation had begun. And the logs sigh, a long, gentle breath in. The embers here beside us, a deep, low sound of rest. The fire here reminds us of those tiny sparks, those first hesitant lights in the windows. The small acts of courage multiplied until they became a blinding flame. And we sit in the soft, persistent heat, feeling the ghost of that cold, damp air upon us, and wondering about the riders who continued long after Prescott. Those anonymous figures who carried the warning deeper into Worcester County, deeper into the hills and mountains. They are shadows lost to the official record, simply names on forgotten receipts for replacement horses or simple expense claims for exhausted lanterns. Their names dissolved into the greater narrative of the Revolution, and we can imagine them slowing their pace now, the immediate terror fading, replaced by a deep, exhausted silence after the shouting was done. What happened to the horses when the ride was finished? Did they stand steaming in a quiet barn, grateful for the sudden stillness? Did the riders simply slump against the feed troughs, too tired even to pray? And did they ever again feel that level of pure adrenaline, that blinding necessity? The night swallowed the details. The firelight flickered across faces, and then darkness returned, leaving only the memory of the immense effort, and the mystery remains. Not who rode, but who listened, and what sound finally broke the silence after the last hoofbeat faded away. A silence so deep, it felt like the world was holding its breath, waiting for the very first gunshot that would ring out at dawn. A mystery drifting on the smoke trail toward the next. Ancient Chronicle. And the quiet of the fire deepens now, asking only for your slow, peaceful rest. The glowing wood exhales a tiny breath of smoke, a thin silver-gray ribbon rising slowly into the black air. The embers deepen their color, sinking into a pool of quiet red, a warm heart beating low in the hearth. Feel the slow, steady heat wash across your hands, a light that knows nothing of time, a primal comfort that holds the secrets of all who have ever gathered against the night. This fire remembers the darkness outside the ring of light, the overwhelming, black velvet silence that stretched across New England in the long-ago spring of 1775. It remembers the sound, the soft, muffled thudding of hooves on earth, still damp from the recent thaw, a rhythm insistent and anxious, moving swiftly across the hidden paths. We often speak of the single spark, the lone lantern hung high in the steeple, telling one man to ride north. We cherish the legend of Paul Revere, the dedicated silversmith, the tireless messenger, carrying the weight of a dawning nation on his tired shoulders. But the history we tell is often just a flicker, a moment captured, while the true, wide landscape of courage lay spread out, vast and intricate, under the cold, frost-kissed moon. Imagine instead not one rider, but a deep, quiet network, a silent tapestry of men and women who understood the immense danger of the hour. They were the forgotten threads, the weavers of that night, the ones who ensured that the alarm traveled far wider and far faster than any single horseman could ever manage. Think of William Dawes riding the longer, dustier southern route, a different kind of urgency in his gait, moving through Roxbury and Cambridge. A cautious shadow mirroring Revere's northern journey. He carried the same vital news. The British regulars were moving out, their boats softly crossing the Charles River under cover of that enveloping darkness. The plan was a necessity, Not a grand romantic gesture. It was practical, resilience built upon friendship and shared commitment. If one rider fell, if one messenger was intercepted by the patrolling redcoats, another must surely get through. The roads were treacherous, not only with mud and shadow, but with enemy patrols stationed strategically, waiting for exactly this sort of clandestine movement. The air itself was thick with suspicion. The slightest sound, the distant bark of a dog, the sudden creak of leather could mean exposure, could mean the failure of the entire operation. We picture Revere's gallop, a glorious, isolated sprint, but he was never truly alone. He was of a chain, a human telegraph system, relying on the readiness of friends, innkeepers, stable boys, and farmers who stood ready at their windows, their hearts pounding in anticipation of the signal. Picture Dr. Samuel Prescott, a young physician whose knowledge of the landscape proved essential when Revere and Dawes finally met up in Lexington, only to be intercepted. It was Prescott who managed to evade the immediate capture, carrying the message onward through the dark woods, completing the unfinished circuit, a hero born purely of necessity and circumstance. This was the quiet conspiracy, the secret whisper traveling across the land, moving faster than the news could be printed, faster than any official dispatch. It was a vast, silent undertaking, powered not by fame or fortune, but by the simple, stubborn belief that liberty was worth risking everything that night. They rode not just one path, but many, the silver thread splitting into countless fine lines of courage, covering every village, every farmstead, every hidden corner of the sleeping colony. Listen to the low, steady crackle of the fire, a sound that has accompanied every midnight watch, every long, tense journey since time began. Let the quiet intensity of that forgotten network settle around you, a reminder that the greatest acts of history are often built on the shared, silent strength of many, not the solitary glamour of one. The fire sinks lower now, a soft orange heartbeat glowing steadily, a quiet witness to the past. A gentle hush settles over the woodpile. The crackle becomes a whisper. A slow, rhythmic sigh, releasing the story of that chill April night 250 years ago. We sit here warm and safe, while they rode cold and tense through the deep Massachusetts darkness. A network of forgotten figures, moving like shadows across the landscape. They were not just solitary heroes. They were a system of alarm riders, waiting for the signal, the glimmer from the Old North Church lantern, a silent, coded promise of danger. Paul Revere gets the legend, the fame, the poem. But William Dawes rode too, a slower, more deliberate man, taking the longer, more circuitous route, perhaps less dramatic, but equally vital, carrying the same urgent news that the regulars were out. The British troops were mobilizing towards Lexington and Concord. Think of the ground they covered. The colonial roads were treacherous paths of hardened mud and frozen ruts, the air thick with the smell of damp pine and cold river water. The hooves clapped a muffled beat against the earth, a sound they had to keep quiet, yet hurry. They risked capture and treason every mile they traveled. The real story lies in the smaller connections, the farmers waiting by the roadside, the tavern keepers sleeping lightly, the Minutemen captains who had been warned months ago to keep their powder dry and their muskets clean. This was not a spontaneous ride. It was the activation of a carefully laid plan, a web spun tight across the villages. Imagine the fear as Dawes or Revere or the dozens of other nameless riders pounded on a farmhouse door in the dead of night, a sound that means only one thing: trouble and immediate action. The sleepy farmer opens the door, holding a flickering tallow candle, its light barely piercing the immense darkness beyond. The rider does not tarry. They speak the code word: Perhaps they simply shout, "The regulars are coming," and then they are gone, swallowed by the shadows, leaving the farmer standing there, heart hammering in his chest, knowing that his comfortable life, the planting, the harvest, the quiet rhythm of the seasons is about to break violently. He quickly dresses his wife, whispering reassurances as he grabs his hunting pouch, his powder horn, his aged musket. The alarm spreads quickly now, house to house, farm to farm, not by horse, but by foot, by breath, by the passing of a terrified whisper into the ear of a neighbor. The atmosphere was electric, heavy with apprehension, a silent dread hanging over the fields that April night. The towns of Menotomy and Cambridge and Lexington began to stir, not with the sound of bells, but with the muffled clicks of loading weapons, the quiet preparation of men expecting to stand against an empire. The ride was a success because it was a relay race, a collaborative effort of ordinary colonists who became links in a fiery chain of resistance. Men like Samuel Prescott, who carried the alarm further west after Revere was captured, ensuring the message reached Concord. They risked everything for the principle of liberty, the warmth of their hearths, the safety of their families. They knew the penalty for failure was death, yet they rode on, through the icy chill, through the looming shadows, a testament to courage under pressure. The slow flame of the fire before us reflects the quiet resolve of those midnight messengers, their urgency now a gentle history, resting easy beside us. We hear the crackle, 1,000 hoofbeats in the wood, a quiet reminder of that pivotal night, when a network of heroes rode into the light of legend, a profound, deep, slow awakening across the land, a calming truth settling around us now, a beautiful rest. The urgency now shifts from the sound of their hooves to the sudden smothering silence of the road ahead. A shadow detaches itself from the hedgerow, a cluster of dark shapes that mean British patrols. Revere pulls hard on the bridle, his horse sliding in the gravel. Dawes tries to veer off towards a stone wall. Prescott, always the smoothest rider, melts immediately away, a phantom leaping the split-rail fence, disappearing into the moist fields. He is the message now, uncatchable, weaving through the dew-soaked pasture. Revere is surrounded, stopped, questioned, held tight. The redcoats search his bags, demand his intent. They do not know the depth of the disaster he has already set in motion. They think they have caught the chief spy. They think they have stopped the alarm. They are wrong. So deeply, beautifully wrong. Revere must stand there in the cold moonlight, helpless, listening to the distant, muffled hoofbeats of the other riders. The network is too vast, too complex to be stopped by one patrol. The news is already traveling west, beyond Concord, beyond Worcester, spreading like slow wildfire through the timberlands. Meanwhile, Dr. Prescott races on, his breath visible in the chilled air. He knows the farm tracks, the hidden logging trails. He is a doctor. He knows the geography of the body and the land. The message burns in his mind. Lexington is warned. Concord is next. He bursts through a clearing, startling a family of deer. Imagine the scene in a small farmhouse near Lincoln. The hearth fire has been banked for the long, cool night. Only a deep, steady throb of red coals holds the heat. The parents are asleep upstairs. The stillness is profound. Then, a frantic rapping on the thick wooden door. It is Josiah, or perhaps Amos, a local man soaked with sweat. His horse is lathered, breathing heavily outside. The father comes down, lamp in hand, shielding the flame. The message is delivered quickly in a fierce whisper. The regulars are out. The road is swarming. Get ready. The news does not crash. It settles. It sinks like cold water. The man goes back to the fire, gently stirring the coals. The tiny sound of the shifting embers is the loudest sound in the room. He pokes the sleeping logs, and the flames surge up quickly, brightly. It is not a cheerful light. It is a preparation light, a serious amber glow.
across Middlesex County, similar scenes unfold. A network of forgotten men roused from their sleep. They were merely
links in the chain, but they held the power. They carried the fate of the militia in their simple leather pouches. Farmers, blacksmiths, tavern keepers, their only uniform was determination. The firelight catches the worried lines on the farmer's face. He wakes his sons. The sound of muskets being checked. A small click. A scrape of metal on stone. A quiet readiness. They moved with a settled calm that comes from knowing the land. They knew this night would come. They simply waited for the signal. The fire continues its slow, careful consumption of the wood. A sound of ancient comfort juxtaposed with sudden terror. The warmth spreading through the kitchen is a false shield, but it offers a moment of clarity before stepping out into the cold night to face the unknown number of marching feet, the steady beat of the drum. We remember Revere's gallop, the single silver thread of his famous journey, but the true wonder was the deep, rich tapestry woven beneath him, the hundreds of unnamed loyalists who rode in the dark. Their names are lost, but their urgency is held still in the soil, in the old stone walls that line the lonely country. Roads. The sound of their passing hooves fades now into the distance. The alarm has been raised. The militia is gathering. The fires are roaring higher in the villages. A silent pause settles over the fields before the inevitable meeting. What became of all those other messengers once their journey was done? Did they simply return to their plows, their names unrecorded? Did they ride until dawn, exhausted, then fall asleep by the embers of their own hearths? And did the deep stillness that followed the ride hold secrets, secrets of the very earth they rode across? We must wonder. What the land remembers, the stones, the old silent trees, what they heard that night. Did the rhythm of the hundreds of horses unlock something older, a deeper knowledge buried beneath the sleeping towns? Something that connects the riders, not just to revolution, but to the history of the darkness itself. We drift now towards that silent space between the ringing alarm and the first shot fired, a timeless mystery, the silence after the horses pass, the deep quiet of waiting. The air hangs heavy now with cedar smoke and the faint, deep perfume of damp earth, a comforting ancestral scent that wraps us in ancient warmth, a slow breath drawn deep, deep down into the chest. The fire settles into its deepest hum, its quietest phase. The orange light breathes across the packed ground, moving like slow liquid gold. The embers are small, perfect jewels of perfect, patient heat, collapsing gently into pale gray ash. A soft, almost soundless whisper, a tiny snap, a fleeting memory of dry wood becoming pure light, becoming soft air. We drift backwards now, drift backwards gently to a time when fear and urgent hope were twin flames burning in the same small towns. Back to the vast Massachusetts darkness of 1775, a cold, crisp spring night, waiting for the agreed signal, the fire. We see tonight is the ghost of that old light, the very same glow that warmed the anxious hands of those riders, the same illumination casting shadows on maps drawn hastily on tavern tables, the entire colony holding its breath, a long, quiet intake of the vast April cold. We remember, often, one name, one tireless silver silhouette against the pale moon, Paul Revere, the silversmith, the devoted alarm bell. But the journey, the massive, life-altering undertaking was never meant for one man alone. It was a delicate, resilient web, a secret language whispered across fields and frozen marshland, a relay team of shadows moving silently through the historic landscape, a collective heart beating urgently in the dark. Think now of the stable hands checking the girth straps, tightening the leather bridle just so, the faint, deep smell of oil and nervous horse sweat, in that deep black hour before midnight. Think of the other messengers, the quiet, tireless riders. Dr. Samuel Prescott, the steady man. William Dawes, the pathfinder, heading south along the slower, more complex route. They were not heroes yet. They were simply neighbors doing a necessary dark work. Their shared mission to turn cautious whispers into piercing, urgent shouts, to transform vast rural darkness into sudden, startling light. They carried nothing but urgent speed and the deep, chilling knowledge of approaching organized danger. The network was the true marvel, the forgotten story of preparedness built on deep trust, a deep-rooted understanding of the stakes involved. There were 20 or 30 riders prepared to gallop through the Middlesex night, 20 or 30 separate beams of light splitting the dense colonial blackness. They had established hidden depots of supplies of powder and ball. They had marked out safe houses, places where a man could catch a quick, silent breath or change a sweating, exhausted horse. Imagine the specific weight of that silence. The only sound, the soft, rhythmic thudding of hoofbeats on damp, muddy lanes. A sound meant to be absorbed by the earth, not carried on the sharp wind. Every shadow a potential threat, every window a potential British sentry. The anxiety was a taste of iron on the tongue. The responsibility, a physical crushing pressure on the shoulders of these ordinary men, these bakers and doctors and farmers who had suddenly become the indispensable vital arteries of revolution. They moved like spirits through the old crooked lanes, past sleeping stone walls and silent shuttered farmhouses, their eyes fixed only on the cold, patient moon, their bodies coiled springs of absolute quiet determination, heading toward the next sleepy village, toward the next crucial door that must be urgently hammered open to wake the slumbering world. This was the quiet choreography of survival, the perfect execution of a plan months in the making, designed to withstand failure or capture or accident, a system of redundancy built on friendship and absolute belief in the coming dawn, that light, that slow creeping light of the new day. They were riding to meet. The soft, steady hiss of the oak logs settles us deeper into this ancient warmth, a perfect quiet companion to the wild cold anxiety of that April night, long, long ago. We feel the heat spreading across our palms, where the air might have been sharp with frost, where the fear of the coming warming weighed down every waking soul in New England. Paul Revere was not a lone sentinel flashing across darkness. He was a thread, one essential runner in a beautifully organized tapestry woven by the committees of safety and observation, the secret heart of the resistance. These were neighbors, trusted friends, men and women who knew the winding river paths, the hidden shortcuts through dense woods, the exact moment when the tide was low enough to cross the mudflats without sinking. Imagine the month of preparation, the quiet mapping of every mile, the identification of every Tory household that needed to be avoided, every Patriot barn where a fresh horse might be waiting, every kitchen where a cup of hot cider could be snatched in the cold dark. The network was an immense breathing creature built entirely on trust and whisper. The anxiety pulsed through every colonial town, from Charlestown Neck all the way to Concord and beyond, a slow, deliberate drumbeat, waiting for the signal. When the 2 lanterns flared in the steeple of the Old North Church, a silent gasp traveled through the dark countryside, the signal confirming that the British troops were moving by water toward Cambridge and then inland. This was the moment the riders were waiting for. William Dawes took the longer inland route designed as redundancy in case Revere was intercepted, ensuring the message would surely pass, and Revere himself crossed the river under the noses of the waiting British warships, the muffled oars dipping silently into the cold black water, the risk immediate, the danger pressing down like the heavy cloak he wore. The ride itself was an absolute physical endurance test, not the graceful canter of patriotic drawings,
but a desperate, grueling gallop through sticky spring mud and deep shadow. The horse breathing heavily, its flanks lathered, the leather saddle protesting with every urgent bounce. The air tasted sharply of spring thaw and the pungent smell of manure and the deep, bitter fear that fuels revolution. He wasn't shouting only the warning of the British approach. He was activating the network. He was telling the Minutemen to rise now. The farmhouses he passed were dark, silent, except for the quick knock, the urgent, low explanation, delivered through a half-open door. The sleepy recognition in the eyes of the man who instantly understood the magnitude of the hour. This was not a moment for elaborate speeches. It was a moment for simple commands and fast action. The message was received. The next rider was saddled. The relay began anew, stretching across the darkened landscape. We watched the embers. Here they glow red gold and hypnotic, mirroring the firelight that might have quickly been struck in those farmhouses. Just enough light to grab a musket or buckle a sword, or whisper goodbye before vanishing into the night. The sound of his hooves faded into the immense quiet, the silence of the land absorbing the weight of destiny. The land waited patiently for the dawn that would bring war. But Revere did not complete the ride to Concord. He met Dawes and the critical third rider, Samuel Prescott, in Lexington, where the three paused to warn Sam Adams and John Hancock before continuing their mission. It was near Concord that Revere and Dawes were stopped by a British patrol. The legendary ride ended abruptly in the grasp of the enemy, the famed messenger silenced by capture. Yet the warning had already spread like wildfire, precisely because of the decentralized network, because of the preparation and the trust they had built. Prescott, the young doctor who joined them, slipped away and carried the warning through to Concord, ensuring the armories were cleared. Cannon hidden. The message secured. The fire keeps whispering its secrets. The names of the unsung heroes, whose hoofbeats mixed with Revere's, are lost to history, but whose courage ensured that Lexington and Concord were not surprised. We hold their memory in this warmth, this soft, steady crackle of wood, this long, peaceful night. Rest now. The lantern swung low along the stone fence, shadows stretching monstrously ahead of the tired mares. The message passed now, not just on horseback, but whispered across kitchen tables in the dead chill of April pre-dawn. One farmer to his sleeping neighbor, tapping. Lightly on the pane, the urgency wrapped in careful silence, not wanting to wake the youngest children, the ones still dreaming of summer gardens and a freedom that they might never truly know. They had established relay points hours earlier, small fires banked beneath damp moss, ready to be flared into a guiding signal if the primary riders failed or fell to the waiting redcoats patrolling the back roads of Medford and Lexington, villages asleep, but waiting, like a coiled spring beneath the blanket of the New England night. The network extended through the quiet bravery of innkeepers who left small lights in specific windows signifying safe passage or danger ahead. The color of the candle flame becoming its own coded language. Green for all clear, meaning the coast was momentarily safe from patrols. Red for danger, meaning turn back now, risk everything on a dirt track detour. This silent system relied on trust, absolute and untested trust, that the person signaling had truly seen what they claimed to see, that they were not spies setting a deadly trap for the exhausted messengers. Imagine the sweat of the horses dripping onto the cold dust, the smell of leather rubbed raw against. The saddle tree, the riders themselves numb from the waist down, their throats dry, their lungs aching from the sustained shout of the alarm. They knew their names might never be recorded. They were just threads in a vast tapestry of warning, a tapestry woven by lamplight and hidden paths, leading always east toward the rising sun and the confrontation that dawn promised. They carried notes pinned inside their coats, small scraps of paper detailing troop movements and estimated numbers, the kind of evidence that, if found, meant hanging. But the danger was just the cost of doing business. The price of whispering liberty into the ear of a sleeping nation. The slow, grinding sound of heavy wagon wheels being oiled quietly in barnyards miles away. Farmers strapping on ill-fitting powder horns, testing the weight of ancient muskets passed down through generations of colonial history. The firelight flickering within the open doorways, casting long shadows of preparation. The soft, insistent murmur of women preparing food and wrapping supplies for men who might not return. These women, the forgotten backbone of the network, stood ready with buckets of water to douse any small signal fires instantly if a patrol
appeared. They stood sentinel by the windows, watching the distant flicker of official military torches, comparing the cadence of those lights to the expected arrival of their own messengers. They were the silent keepers of the flame, the ones who ensured that the spark of Revere and Dawes was fanned into a roaring organizational inferno across the townships. The alarm became sound itself, carried not just by the clatter of hooves, but by the barking of farm dogs, responding to the sudden movement of strangers in the fields. The insistent tolling of church bells, ringing perhaps a minute too long. For morning service, the rhythm shifting subtly from worship to warning. A musical alarm understood instantly by every sleeping man who had learned the language of bells and signals since childhood. Think of Deacon John Larkin waiting patiently in his farmhouse, holding the reins of the fastest horse he owned, a fresh animal ready for the third leg of a journey he had planned weeks ago, knowing he would never receive the glory, but ensuring the message would travel further, faster, safer. He was one of hundreds, men and women, who accepted their supporting role in the grand historical drama, content to be the unseen engine beneath the famous carriage wheels, their names lost to the turning pages of time. Their contribution, just the smooth transition of one tired rider giving way to one fresh mount. One whispered word becoming one shouted rallying cry. And so, the alarm spread far beyond the famous hoofbeats, into the deepest corners of the colonial consciousness. A fire not of wood, but of urgency, sweeping through the land, leaving behind only the cold ashes of doubt and the heat of shared resolve. But what about the oldest signals, the ones that predated that? Lanterns and the riders, the forgotten network that existed even before the colonies were named. A quiet hum, perhaps a resonance carried on the very wind, the deep earth breathing, a rhythm that called the militia, not just from their beds, but from their ancient memories. A sound, perhaps echoing in the very crackle of the fire beside us now. A message sent across oceans of time. Something whispering, something about the quiet strength of the ground beneath us, still holding the memory of those first footsteps, that first spark of defiance. We wonder about those ancient sparks, those premonitions, that guide us even now in our deep sleep moments. And we let the embers cool slowly, waiting for the next echo of history to drift toward us from the warm light of the fire. The cedar logs settle deep into themselves, a sound like dry leaves crushed under a heavy velvet blanket. The coals beneath them are slow stars, flickering low and red near the earth, a quiet hiss of resin escaping the oldest wood. This ancient heat spreads slowly, touching your skin with a comforting weight, a steady rhythm, a perfect stillness before the memory begins. We listen. Tonight to the ghost stories of swift horses and the network of men who kept watch when the world was dark, entrusting only the glimmering light they carried in their hearts and in their small lanterns. Everyone remembers the famous writer Paul Revere, his name bright like a sudden spark, moving fast through the history books. But the true miracle of that night was the intricate web, the safety net woven across the Massachusetts countryside, a tapestry of writers and watchers and silent allies, ready to receive and pass the flame. It was April 1775, and the air was thick with tension.
a quiet humidity that pressed down on the narrow streets of Boston. The British were stirring, assembling their boots and their weapons, preparing for a move that everyone knew was coming, but no one knew exactly when or how, deep into the sleeping country they planned to strike. The leaders had built a secret system years in advance, a slow, careful architecture of alarm bells and coded warnings, far away from the official military channels. This system relied entirely on trust, on darkness, and on the simple act of a neighbor lighting a lantern for a neighbor they might never see again. It was a chain of preparedness, the slow, quiet hum of vigilance. Paul Revere was essential, but he was only one link in the profound chain of writers. William Dawes took the longer southern route, a deliberate, slow detour, a shadow moving silently away from the noise of Boston, across the neck where the mud smelled sharp and cold. His mission was identical, yet his rhythm was different, a slow, steady pulse beat, far from the spotlight. Dawes rode toward Roxbury and Dedham, moving through the older settlements where the homes were set back further from the road, and the silence was profound. Imagine him now, a dark figure, muffled in wool and leather, the dampness seeping into the cloth, the steady, slow breath of the horse under the cold starlight. He carried the vital intelligence, the one if by land, the two if by sea signal, now confirmed by the lanterns hanging high in the Old North Church steeple, visible only for a moment to those who knew where to look, before the world swallowed the light again. The genius of the plan was redundancy. It was distribution. It was the dispersal of risk. Across many humble shoulders. There were other riders too, forgotten names, who took shorter paths, who waited in specific inns or specific farmhouses, just to receive the low murmur of the news and carry it 5 miles more, 10 miles more, into the deeper country, where the farmers slept soundly, waiting for the signal that would wake them not to morning chores, but to war. These men traveled the old paths, the winding farm tracks, the whispering lanes covered in damp earth and shadowed by ancient oaks. The light of their journey was small and contained, like the glow of our bonfire tonight, a persistent, gentle truth, carried against the overwhelming vastness of the midnight world. They were not racing against time, so much as they were moving with it, spreading the news like a slow spreading warmth, a necessary heat across the land, a secret language whispered from barn to barn, until the whole system was alive and humming in the darkness. The firelight helps us see the small hidden movements of history. The low whisper passed from a farmer waiting by his gate to a son standing ready with a stable lantern, a signal that was not shouted, but simply confirmed a knowing nod under the deep, cold ceiling of the April night sky. This was the quiet heroism, the slow and steady movement of many, many sleepers waking up to protect their collective dream. The air of that April night hung heavy and cold, a damp chill soaking into the wool coats of those waiting by the riverbanks. The low hiss of the distant mystic river water flowing endlessly, a sound swallowed quickly by the huge darkness of the colonial landscape. Imagine the shadows dancing far outside the reach of our own protective firelight back then. Every small sound was amplified. Every rustle of leaves could mean the approach of the king's men. The oppressive silence of the countryside was broken only by the rhythmic breathing of tired horses, their hooves occasionally scraping against loose gravel, a silent network stretching across miles and miles of sleeping villages, waiting for the signal, waiting for the spark. We focus so often on the famous flash of Paul Revere, but forget the dozens of quiet heroes riding simultaneous loops, men like William Dawes, who took the longer land route to evade scrutiny, a meticulous plan unfolding under the shroud of midnight, his mission equally vital, equally fraught with danger, and Dr. Samuel Prescott joining them later, adding his strength to the relay system. A system designed not for glory, but for absolute necessity. They were the veins of the revolution, pumping information through the dark New England night. Each man memorizing names and locations, anticipating danger at every blind corner. The saddles chafing, the leather creaking, their muscles burning from hours of hard riding, a profound exhaustion settling deep into their bones. Yet the urgency pushed them forward, a whisper of freedom driving them faster than any whip. Think
of the sheer logistical genius involved in coordinating this wide-scale panic across dozens of isolated farmsteads and tiny hamlets. The riders had to know the landscape intimately, the hidden shortcuts, the soft ground where a horse might stumble, the specific doors to knock on, the precise tone of voice to use so as not to alert an enemy sympathizer hiding nearby. They did not carry written orders. There was no time for sealed dispatches. The message had to be memorized, crisp and instantly transferable. The regulars are out. The regulars are coming. Not a shout, but a fierce whisper. Repeated from town line to town line, a chain reaction of wakefulness stretching from Charlestown to Lexington and Concord. A true decentralized mastery of movement achieved solely through courage and local knowledge. They risked not just capture, but immediate execution for treason. Every mile covered was a defiant act against the greatest military power on earth. Every galloping heartbeat, a drum roll signaling the dawn of a new struggle. Feel the radiant heat of our fire now against your skin. A gentle comfort, absent for those riders who relied only on the adrenaline of fear and purpose. Our fire crackles. A soft reminder of the simple need for light, the ancient human instinct to gather against the cold. The sparks drifting skyward like tiny messengers, ascending into the vast canopy of night. Much like those riders who were themselves messengers, fleeting lights against the massive blackness of the British occupation. Imagine their desperation, the smell of wood smoke clinging to their clothes, a silent prayer carried on the wind as they pounded down dirt roads, past farmhouses dark and still. The whole world asleep, except for this vital chain of awakening. The network was complex, relying on everyone from stable boys, fetching fresh mounts to tavern keepers, quietly passing along rumors to women standing watch at attic windows, ready to light a lamp if the redcoats appeared too close. This was a community effort of profound resistance, designed to ensure that if one rider fell, another would instantaneously take his place. Dawes was slowed down by a tricky river crossing. Revere was briefly detained, but the message never stopped moving. It flowed onward through others, like a river finding a new path around a fallen stone. Dr. Prescott, the quiet man who finished the mission, was a testament to the redundancy. Of the plan, he alone slipped past the British patrol, where Revere and Dawes were stopped, carrying the warning, all the way to Concord, ensuring the munitions were moved, the cannons hidden, the Minutemen assembled and ready. This was not a solo performance. This was a chorus of warnings echoing across Middlesex County, a decentralized mastery of communication built on trust and shared risk. Imagine the scale of this silent operation. Scores of men, women, and children positioned strategically, waiting, listening, ready to pass the next crucial piece of intelligence. The British were moving, and so was the warning. System, a web woven of grit and determination, ensuring that when the sun finally rose on Lexington, the Minutemen would be ready, standing firm against the dawn, ready to face the music of history. Their courage fueled by the quiet network of riders. Everyone forgot. The firelight remembers. Their breathing now, the deep hush of the countryside, holding its breath against the urgency. The map was alive with silent arrows pointing outward from Boston town. Not just Revere, not just Dawes, but dozens of hushed names. Riders on borrowed mares, splashing through frozen puddles, each hoofbeat sinking slightly into the soft spring mud, a heavy thud, thud, thud.
swallowed by the immense darkness. Think of the simple farmers stirred from their deep sleep. The knock was always soft, gentle, yet insistent. A whisper of warning against the sleeping wooden doorframe. The scent of damp earth and the smoke from a dying hearth meeting the cold night air. John Brown was heading north, taking the river road. Sarah Hammond was cycling back, carrying messages between the main hubs. Silent shadows melting into the tree line. They carried the flame, the heat of the bonfire, deep into the marrow of the colony. The warmth spreading outward, slow and steady. A low burning ember of resistance, tucked safely beneath the skin of the night. Imagine the exhaustion, the profound ache in the spine. Hours spent bent low over the horse's mane. The wind, a constant dull roar in the ears. The only comfort, the steady, familiar rhythm of the animal beneath them, a living heartbeat connected to the soil below. The air tastes like iron and dew. It is a perfect mirror of the fire's glow. This network, each rider a separate splinter of light, moving through the vast woodpile of the night. If one light went out, others nearby would instantly flare brighter. The system was redundant, resilient, silent. They bypassed the main taverns. They avoided the open roads where the British patrols might linger, sticking instead to the cowpaths, the forgotten fence lines, the shallow streams. These paths were known only to the locals, passed down through generations of slow walking. They knew which stone was loose on the bridge. They knew which dog barked loudest. They knew the exact sound of a solitary British boot striking the gravel road miles away. A dull, unmistakable scrape of leather and metal. The riders listened with the intensity of ancient hunters. Every cricket chirp, every owl's cry was scrutinized. Was that the wind shifting the branches, or was that the quiet, disciplined movement of men marching toward Lexington Green? The network depended on trust, absolute, instantaneous trust. A quick glance, a nodded acknowledgement, a single phrase whispered low. The regulars are out. That was enough. The message was understood. The sleepy farmstead woke up. The muskets were quietly gathered from above the mantel. The powder horns were checked. The children shielded from the windows. The fire was stoked higher, adding just a little more light, a flickering guidepost in the immense, oppressive dark. The warmth of the fire back in Boston was now diffused across 30 miles of rolling hills. It was no longer a single towering blaze, but thousands of tiny kitchen fires being quietly lit. A slow ignition of the sleeping revolution. But as dawn approached, the deepest danger remained shrouded. The exhaustion of the final riders was overwhelming. They had done their job. They had delivered the warning. Now they rode toward the gathering danger, not away from it, moving through the thinning mist of the new morning, where the world was still damp and gray and undefined. One of the final riders, a young woman named Sybil Ludington, perhaps reaches the edge of Concord just as the mist begins to dissolve. She sees something strange lying by the side of the road, a small, dull glint of copper reflecting the weak light. It is not a farmer's tool. It is not a piece of harness leather. It is a brass button, freshly polished, stamped with the royal cipher. It is a deliberate signal, placed there, or perhaps just forgotten, a trace of the advance guard that passed hours earlier. But beneath the button, tucked into the damp moss, is a tiny fold of thick parchment, crisp and dry, a secret left behind on the road between the darkness and the dawn, a message waiting to be discovered, still sealed and warm with the passing human touch. What ancient secret does this royal parchment hold, resting quietly in the dew-soaked grass, waiting for the next of the chronicle to begin? The deep amber light is sighing now, a gentle breath against the rough, dark wood, and you can watch the way the cedar ash begins to lift and softly drift away, a silent smoke that tells no tales.
It merely holds the warmth within its haze, and the slow, low sound, the tiny snap of tension as ancient fuel surrenders to the heat, is your signal now, your gentle, resting chime. A perfect rhythm for this sleeping moment, this protected space where shadows dance so lightly upon the ceiling far above your face. A place of safety built of quiet firelight and the memory of things long past and distant. We move tonight beneath that watchful ember glow to a night much colder, much more tense.
Night when the world held its breath, in April air, and the silence itself felt like a heavy thing pressed upon the fields of Massachusetts. This is not just the tale of one famous name, a legend stamped upon the history books, but the woven thread, the vast, deep network of shadows moving faster than the news itself. A system built on whispers and quick horses, and the profound trust between neighbor and neighbor. A trust that meant freedom or total ruin. The signal lanterns hung high in the Old North Church were just the first faint spark, the primary.
Warning, they were meant only for those who waited, those who already had their saddles cinched tight, their breath steaming white in the bitter cold. Paul Revere, he was the swift, silent center, the silver tongue moving through the darkness. But William Dawes rode too, that same night, taking a slower path, a winding route of caution, a crucial redundancy against capture. He moved south, while Revere moved inland toward Lexington. And these two known riders were themselves just points in a greater line of messengers, prepared, ready to spring from their beds at any hour to receive the word, and instantly pass it on like a flickering flame carried on a fragile wick. Think of the farmers, barely awake and shivering, waiting by their kitchen hearths, not for warmth, but for the sound of hooves, a quick knock, a low, urgent code, their children sleeping soundly, unaware that history was galloped right past their window frames. These men were the vital arteries of warning, the network of nameless patriots spread thin from Charlestown Neck far into Concord's sleepy groves. They carried the message that the regulars were stirring, their disciplined ranks forming in the London fog, preparing to move. Their dark plan unfolding to seize the hidden caches of powder and of shot, to silence the noisy architects of freedom. Revere rode hard, that first leg filled with urgency, his horse's breath a rhythmic puffing cloud, the frosty ground absorbing the hammering sound. And then he met up with Dawes in Lexington's dark square, two messengers converging, two sources of proof. And then they welcomed Dr. Samuel Prescott, a man of knowledge and local navigation, who knew the hidden lanes, the shortcuts through the fields. The three men riding now together for a time, a triple thread of warning. For the night, each one a piece of crucial intelligence, each horse carrying the weight of the new world's destiny. This was the forgotten chain, the quiet courage, the unseen effort that allowed the alarm to surge ahead of the approaching military tide. A silent sacrifice in the very deepest dark, a secret held only by the hooves and the frosty breath, a story whispered by the dying light of the moon. The fire settles deep now, a slow breath moving through the coals. The wood groans softly, a final sigh before surrender. We watch the smoke spiral upward, dissolving into the dark canopy, and feel the ancient warmth that has sustained humans through every crisis, every dark night. It is the same warmth that drove away the colonial chill on that pivotal midnight. The air of April 1775 was heavy, not just with dew, but with dread. A silent tension gripped the towns surrounding Boston. Boston itself was an occupied cage, its streets echoing only with the heavy, measured steps of the redcoat patrols. They were shadows moving through shadows,
arrogant and unaware of the web woven around them. A network of riders was poised in farmhouses and taverns, along routes that seemed casual on a map, but were lines of destiny. These riders were farmers, doctors, coopers, silversmiths, the silent muscle of the revolution. They waited, not knowing exactly when the signal would come, only that it must. They felt the cold seeping into their leather boots, the dampness clinging to the brick walls. Imagine the darkness of that colonial night, a true and absolute darkness. No streetlights, only the occasional flicker of a shuttered lantern or the pale glow of a hidden hearth. The moon had abandoned them, making the task of the messengers infinitely more perilous. But darkness was also their ally, their cloak. Dr. Joseph Warren, the mastermind, stayed behind in Boston, organizing the final moves. He was the spider at the center of the web, pulling the threads that stretched out into the countryside. He knew the risk. He knew the cost of failure. But he trusted the system. He trusted the forgotten riders, men like William Dawes, riding the south route, slower, more cautious, leaving the British checkpoints, and the dozens of other nameless messengers, positioned like dominoes, waiting for the push. They carried the message not just of military movement, but of awakening. The message was simple, but devastating. The regulars are out. The hoofbeats were intentionally muffled, the riders choosing softer ground near hedgerows and fields whenever possible. Each horse was a shared secret, a temporary vessel of liberty. The leather tack creaked, a nervous rhythm against the deep silence of sleeping New England. The towns of Lexington and Concord lay quiet, unassuming villages, wrapped in their deepest sleep. Their militiamen, the Minutemen, were supposed to be sleeping too, but many were already awake, stirred by instinct or a previous hushed warning. They were cleaning their muskets, checking their powder. Horns feeling the cold steel of the conflict, the cold smell of damp earth, and the sweet, sharp scent of pine needles filled the pre-dawn air. This ride was not a solitary dash. It was a synchronized symphony of urgent whispers, a chain reaction ignited by the faint, distant lanterns hanging from the Old North Church spire. The warmth of our fire today mirrors the scattered domestic hearth fires that were suddenly fanned into life that night. Families awoke to pounding on their doors, the terrifying knowledge that neutrality was over. The news spread like liquid fire through the veins. Of the land, from farm to farm, from village to village, the urgency mounted. The historical setting was not just a stage, it was a character, demanding bravery. The stone walls, the ancient oak trees, the sleeping cows in the fields, all bore witness to the birth pangs of a nation. A massive undertaking, reliant on simple loyalty and the courage of those who would never receive a statue. They rode through the icy dew, the darkness swallowing and releasing them, carrying the spark that would ignite the largest bonfire of all, the American Revolution. And now we sink deeper. Into the quiet knowledge of that night. The fire crackles, a gentle history lesson, a slow reminder of courage found in the shadows. The horse hooves pounded a slow rhythm now that matched the insistent snap of the dry wood in the heart of our fire. Listen closely, beyond the steady pulse of the hoofbeats of Revere and the hooves of Dawes, who followed the slower route. There were dozens more. The message itself was a living thing. It did not rely on one man or two men or even three men. It was designed to multiply, a chain reaction of whispering danger, moving through the low, thick mist of the Massachusetts countryside. It was the network the Committee of Safety had foreseen. As Revere was briefly detained in the dark, damp air near Lexington, a silent relay race was already underway, carried by the second wave of Patriots, men whose names the history books barely whisper. There was Israel Bissell, riding south toward Worcester, carrying the wider alarm, the news stretching beyond the immediate Boston radius. There were nameless farm boys who simply heard the first shouted word and jumped onto their own plow horses, carrying the news, too. The next village over, the network was grassroots and deep-rooted. Imagine the chill of the early morning hours, the scent of wet earth and ancient pine needles pressing down on the silence. Then the sudden chaotic noise, the muffled gallop of a desperate rider passing your farmhouse door. He would not stop. He would simply yell the message into the darkness. The regulars are out. The word traveled not just mile by mile, but ear by ear, mouth by mouth, a spreading wildfire of awareness. The towns had their own agreed-upon alarms, not just church bells, but signal gunshots. Fired 3 times into the cold air. Listen to that deep, resonant thump of the old powder echoing across the valley. That was the sound of mobilization, the sound of hundreds of men stirring from the deepest sleep, pulling on thick woolen coats and fumbling for their powder horns. They didn't need elaborate instructions, just the alarm that the soldiers were marching. The plan was simple. The assembly was instinctual, to gather on the common green, the village heart, where all decisions were made. The fire before us crackles low now, casting dancing light onto the shadows of the unseen.
Trees beyond our circle, the shadows lengthen and shrink, mirroring the shifting urgency of the alarm traveling that dark night. The success of that April night was not the speed of one famous ride, but the absolute certainty that the message would find its way to every sleeping militiaman. Dawes eventually made it through his route before his encounter with the patrol, spreading the seed of the warning. Dr. Prescott, a quiet physician riding home from a late-night call, managed to slip through the dragnet, carrying the alarm to Concord, the vital heart of the supplies. He was the ghost.
Ryder, the one who avoided the capture that entangled Revere and Dawes. Prescott's steady hand and swift horse ensured the Continental stores at Concord would not be lost, ensuring the militia had something to fight with when dawn finally broke. The web held firm. It bent, it stretched, but it did not break. The British were marching towards silent targets, but the moment the first hoof touched the soil outside of Lexington and Concord, the targets were no longer silent. They were awake. They were waiting. They were hundreds of cold men gathering rifles in the damp fog. The fire glows low now, a bed of deep red embers pulsing softly, like the hearts of those thousands of patriots waking in the dark. The mystery remains, though, even after all the riders completed their desperate task. They carried the warning, but who carried the secret knowledge at the Old North Bridge? Was it solely Dr. Warren coordinating the entire network from Boston? Or was there an even deeper layer of communication, a silent order passed from mouth to mouth?
Secret whispered in the shadows of the committees. We must drift now into the mystery of the unseen command structure, the quiet voices that turned a simple alarm into a revolution. Listen to the wood settling in the fire. It is telling us the secrets of the quiet planners who guided the rebellion into the light of dawn. The whisper of the oak wood settles now, a soft, steady sigh, a gentle hum within the velvet dark of deep, deep night. Flickers dance slow against the rough stone hearth. Orange light breathes in and out, a warm, living pulse, each.
Tiny coal shift is a delicate sound, a minute history told. The air is thick with the scent of smoke and ancient warmth. We rest here, suspended in this slow, slow glow, listening not for the future, but for the echo of the past. We move to a different kind of fire now, not the languid hearth fire of sleep, but the urgent gleam of a lantern, held high against the cutting cold of an April moon. The year is 1775, a moment frozen in time, where silence held immense danger, and the wind carried secrets. Everyone remembers. The lone rider, the famous poem Paul Revere on his urgent errand of alarm. But history, like firelight, often sharpens one shape, leaving all the supporting shadows long forgotten and diminished. It was not a solo flight of pure daring. It was a meticulously woven tapestry of silent agreement, a vast nervous network stretching across the Massachusetts countryside, a constellation of watchful patriots waiting in barns and scattered houses, young men and old women, apprentice and farmer, each one a tiny necessary spark needed to ignite the immense dark. They watched the steeple tower, the Old North Church spire. 2. Lights if the regulars advance by sea, one light if they march by land. A simple binary code, a life-altering choice made in minutes. While the city slept, a deep, heavy colonial slumber, oblivious to the movement. The plan was expansive, the risk astronomical. If the message failed at any point, the warning collapsed. The men of Lexington and Concord would be unprepared. So the riders were many, their routes overlapping, their mission unified. We speak of William Dawes, riding the slower path, the southern route, more cautious, more deliberate, moving through Roxbury and Cambridge, a steady, silent presence, ensuring the vital message took root. And there were others, whose names barely survived the passing years. Israel Bissell, the postwriter, carrying dispatches south toward Worcester. Or the unnamed farmer waiting at the edge of a frozen field, ready to mount his tired plow horse and ride 10 crucial miles. They were the arteries of alarm, the essential hidden veins of warning. Each hoofbeat muffled by the dewy spring grass, a quick, urgent drumming swallowed by the endless open fields. These were the riders who had no ballad written for them, no midnight cry repeated through generations of schoolchildren. Their stories are soft murmurs now in the deep, cool archives. Their loyalty was the quiet fuel that powered that sudden, necessary flight. The rush toward Lexington and Concord, a movement toward destiny. Imagine the deep chill, the breath misting white silver in the moonlight, the sheer, paralyzing focus of moving that fast, that late in the hour. The darkness pressing heavy on all sides like a suffocating cloak. And knowing that every shadowed lane, every slight hill, held the clear possibility of interception or sudden, brutal capture. They rode through the scattered sleeping villages of Middlesex County, awakening those who absolutely needed to wake at that moment. A soft, insistent knock, a whispered name, a sudden, overwhelming urgency. The British are marching. The regulars are out, they warned. A truth delivered not by one lone legend, but by dozens of brave shadows, all riding hard into the unknown, terrifying dawn. Under the slow, watchful eye of the silent bonfire's moon, the ancient fire continues its conversation with the deep night. A low murmur, a continuous hiss, as sap pockets explode gently within the heart of the oak logs. The warmth spreads outward, slow and steady, pushing back the vast, chilling expanse of the April darkness. We sit here, wrapped in this golden glow, while the phantom riders of 200 years ago continue their swift spectral journey across the Massachusetts countryside. The historical setting itself was a complex web of stillness and sudden movement. The towns of Lexington and Concord were sleeping, breathing softly under the cloak of British occupation. Yet beneath that sleep was a tension so tight it was almost visible, like a wire pulled taut across the fields. The network of riders, the forgotten heroes whose names are not sung in the nursery rhymes, were the invisible connectors, the nervous system of the Revolution. They were not all famous men. Some were farmers, some were apprentices, some were simply patriots waiting by stables, their saddles already warmed by nervous hands. Men like Dr. Samuel Prescott, who joined Revere and Dawes later on the road, carrying the message further west, past the points where the British patrols were thickest. Their mission was not just to shout, "The regulars are out," but to awaken specific military cells, to mobilize the Minutemen, who needed precise instructions, specific muster points. Imagine the sensory experience of those colonial nights. Darkness was absolute, thick, heavy velvet, broken only by the thin light of a waning crescent moon, or the stray flicker from an unscreened window. The ground beneath the hooves was often uneven, frozen ruts turning into spring mud, demanding absolute focus, demanding an intuitive communication between man and beast. The air smelled of damp pine, of peat smoke, of the metallic scent of fear and adrenaline. Revere and Dawes and Prescott were moving through a world where silence meant safety and noise meant capture. They learned to ride not just quickly, but intelligently, using the natural contours of land, the dry creek beds, the softened earth near the riverbanks to muffle the sound of their approach. When they did pass a farmhouse, they did not simply shout the alarm, they tapped lightly on the glass, delivering the message in a coded whisper, ensuring that only the trusted ears received the urgent news. This was the immense quiet conspiracy of the night, the secret spreading like groundwater beneath the feet of the sleeping occupiers. Every farmhouse, every tavern, every solitary lantern suddenly held a flicker of resistance. The network extended south toward Framingham, north toward Andover, spreading out.
Like the roots of an enormous awakening tree, we can feel the reverberation of those hooves even now through the ground near our own fire. The steady, relentless pounding, a deep bass note beneath the high crackle of the wood. The fire shows us the texture of that past, the grainy, heavy timber of the colonial structures, the simplicity of the stone walls, now bathed in our hypnotic light. They rode through a landscape that was entirely rural, entirely focused on survival and the immediate spring planting, yet they were carrying the seed of a nation, one whispered warning. At a time, the complexity lay in the communication chain. If one rider was captured, the message had to leapfrog to the next man waiting 20 miles down the road. The failure of one link could not mean the failure of the whole. The redundancy, the overlapping routes, the dedication of dozens of unnamed riders is what truly saved the colonial militia that night. It was not a single swift ride. It was a chorus of hooves, a symphony of shadows, all moving toward the dawn and toward war. The embers shift, deep red at the base of the fire. Soft, collapsing sound, a reminder of the continuous, slow passage of time, a quiet transition that mimics the slow, methodical spread of that crucial alarm through the sleeping villages of Massachusetts long ago, a message carried by courage and the dark promise of the Revolutionary night. They understood that the real danger was the silence, the heavy silence before the great noise. The riders vanished into the dew-soaked darkness. Revere was taken, but the message was already free. It flowed like mercury through the veins of the colony. It was carried by Dr. Prescott, who slipped past the waiting patrols. A silent physician bearing the seeds of thunder. He knew the back roads, the cart paths, the shallow crossings. His horse breathed steam into the cold air, a puff of white ghost disappearing instantly. Meanwhile, the captured men, including Revere, stood watching the flickering lanterns of their captors. The British officers joked nervously around a small borrowed fire. They did not realize their small fire was futile, because thousands of other fires were already starting. The bonfires of warning on the highest hills. Not signal fires exactly, but household fires being stirred too early. The scent of wood smoke mingled with the spring chill, a general alarm, made of the most ordinary things. The scrape of an iron kettle, the click of a musket lock being checked, the sound of boots pulling on in the dark, the ancient rhythm of awakening, not to breakfast, but to battle. The great logs in our own fire sink lower now. They whisper, the deep, resonant sounds of the earth shifting, the way the ground itself seemed to tremble that night, just before the dawn. At Lexington Green, the militiamen gathered,
cold, anxious, clutching their worn rifles. They were farmers, mechanics, shoemakers, sleeping lightly. By their own hearths, they had answered a call, a word, a flash of light. The entire operation was built on trust, a vast, silent network of knowing glances. A wife seeing her husband right away without argument. A neighbor waiting patiently by the prearranged lantern. It was the warmth of the community that fueled the cold ride. It was the knowledge that every man had a stake in the firelight. The crackle intensifies, a burst of pitch scenting the air, a metaphor for the first sharp, shattering shots that broke the morning silence, a profound rupture in the peace of the Commonwealth. But even after the shots were fired and the fighting began, the memory of the ride, the urgent whisper, remained vital. It confirmed that the revolution was not just about the moment. It was about the planning, the network, the sustained effort. It was about the tools and the quiet agreements made months prior. We listen to the deep breathing of the fire now, the soft intake and slow release that mimics deep sleep. We think about the hidden maps carried in saddlebags, the diagrams showing where the fastest ferries crossed the rivers, the forgotten details that made the entire ride possible. And as the story settles deep into the embers, we realize that the famous church where the lanterns hung had secret marks carved into the wood of the steeple itself. Tiny, insignificant scratches, placed centuries ago by shipbuilders or maybe something much older. Markings that pointed not just across the river, but to another hidden thing entirely, a forgotten cache of documents or tools essential for that night. Tools not for fighting, but for communication. A system far more complex than two simple lanterns. A hidden language of light placed high above the town. Secret pattern etched into the beams, visible only by the light of a distant signal fire. A mystery resting high in the darkness, waiting for the slow warmth of the next morning to reveal its ancient purpose. We leave the dark steeple hanging there, suspended in the cool night air, while the deep red coals of our bonfire slowly sink further down. The deepest red ember sighs, a gentle hiss, a soft breathing sound against the black wood. The air grows thick with ancient pine scent, a sweetness of smoke that cradles the mind. Slow light dances on the inner. Bark of logs, orange gold, shadows stretch and shorten and blur. The crackle is a rhythm older than memory itself, a steady hypnotic clock ticking softly, a warmth that touches the soul, not just the skin. We drift now toward a different kind of firelight, the tiny glow of a lantern in 1775, a cold April night in Massachusetts, where the fate of a fledgling nation hung silent in the damp air, hovering close to the ground. We know the name of Paul Revere, of course, the midnight ride, the silversmith on horseback, but the true story, the deep truth that mattered, was the immense network of shadows he relied upon, the invisible men and women, the whispered promises, a secret army of communication spanning miles. It was never about one rider speeding through the dark. It was about the organized chaos of many hearts beating to the same urgent tempo, the same fear, the same hope. Think of the others, the forgotten ones. William Dawes, who took the longer southern route, a deliberate slow path, less dramatic, but equally vital. His mission to connect the sleeping towns south of Boston, moving slower than Revere, his purpose was deep. Dispersal, ensuring the alarm was not a sudden burst, but a spreading stain, a liquid warning soaking into the fabric of the countryside. Think of Dr. Prescott, who met them late that night, joining the ride, an accidental hero perhaps, then escaping capture to carry the message onward when the famous pair were briefly detained and halted. He was the essential thread that held the fabric when others frayed. Imagine the stable boys readying the mounts in absolute silence, the women waiting by the windows, holding their breath, the tiny sparks of fear and defiance glowing in their eyes. They
were the quiet engine of the revolution, a system of human whispers, faster than any telegraph, more reliable than any single man. Each horseman carried not just a warning, but a piece of the plan. Each path they took was carefully charted weeks before. They were a matrix of defense, planned meticulously by Joseph Warren and the committees of safety, a map of messengers prepared for this exact hour, this crucial turning point. In the stillness, the sound of the horses was not a loud clatter. It was a muffled beat, a careful gait on the dirt.
Roads, they used shortcuts, cowpaths, hidden lanes, avoiding the main posts, avoiding the British patrols. The leather creaked softly, softly, a barely audible whisper. The moon sometimes hid behind heavy cloud cover, leaving them to navigate by feeling and instinct, trusting the cold smell of the marsh, the sharp bend in the river. Their focus was absolute, the urgency profound. They rode for more than political freedom. They rode for the right to their own silence, the right to their own homes and fields. And as the message spread, house by house, farm by farm, the vast network activated. It was not the clash of armies, yet it was the sound of hundreds of doors quietly unlatching, the sound of slow, measured preparedness. A deep, steady pulse beneath the skin of the sleeping colony. The true ride was a collective dream of waking up together. Feel the chill of that late April air. Smell the distant scent of salt marsh and pine. The horse's breath steaming white in the cold. The knowledge that you are one tiny essential of an enormous, unbreakable chain. A silent, steady, spreading warning light. A fire that would consume the old world entirely. This collective strength, this deep web of trust, is the real history that helps us sleep, knowing that even in the greatest challenges, we are never truly alone, but always connected. The fire here whispers now, a low, comforting sound. My friend Nashela feels the ancient warmth beside you now. We breathe together, deeply, slowly. The shadows lengthen, stilling the air. We were speaking of the others, the riders who vanished into the black ink of that April night, their names lost to the smoke of history, the smoke drifting right here above our fire now, a fine white ghost curling. Up toward the black velvet sky, feel the subtle shift in the air, the way the shadows deepen when a log settles down low. That soft thud is like the muffled hoofbeats far away from Lexington Green. The network stretching out miles beyond the path Revere took. Dawes took, carrying the same vital message. The regulars are marching. The regulars are marching. A whisper that meant everything or nothing, depending on the milepost you stood near. This was not a single dramatic charge. It was a patient, methodical awakening spread across dozens of small hamlets and lonely farms. Israel Bissell, a rider often forgotten, headed south and west toward Worcester, a longer, more grueling ride than either Revere or Dawes faced. His task was to ensure the Western militia knew the danger, the true extent of the mobilization. His message was stamped on the envelope by the Committee of Safety. Urgency absolute. Imagine him riding out of the warm, humid air of the coast into the cold interior darkness, the forests closing in around him, the track becoming rougher, the fear more isolating, the sound of the wind through the pines singing a relentless, unsettling tune, a different kind of darkness than the urban shadows of Boston, a primal darkness where every sudden noise might be ambush or just the settling of the ancient woods. Think of the deep dark of those pre-electric nights, a darkness so profound it swallowed sound. The only light came from the scattered farmhouse windows, or the moon if she chose to show her face. The air smelled of damp earth and late spring chill, and the faint pervasive scent of wood smoke from chimney pots everywhere. The horse sweat mixed with the leather tack squeaking, a high, insistent sound underneath the drumming rhythm of ride.
The riders felt the cold Massachusetts dew settling heavy on their capes, their minds racing faster than the horses they did not simply warn. They carried the future on their backs. Every shadow was a potential redcoat, every unfamiliar sound a signal of impending doom. They rode through sleeping villages, where the dogs were the only witnesses, their barks echoing across the fields, a ripple effect of alarm preceding the actual rider, the truth traveling ahead of the man who bore it. This intricate web worked perfectly. The alarm spread like wildfire, truly like wildfire, springing up from one small spark into an unstoppable conflagration. The militiamen, the Minutemen, stirring from their sleep, grabbing their muskets, checking the priming powder, feeling the ancient fear and the brand new courage surge through their veins. The work was done, the warning delivered. The riders disappeared back into the darkness, their mission complete, their importance fading immediately into legend. But we remember them here, in the deep glow of our own fire. We keep their flame alive. The fire has settled now. Look closely at the coals, the deep cherry red heart of the heat. They are breathing in, slow, steady.
Pulses, inviting the darkness to embrace us, letting the final fragments of the story dissolve into the ambient warmth. The heavy mantle of night presses down gently now, a blanket of rest settling over your shoulders. You have journeyed far tonight, through history and through shadow, and it is time now to let the weariness of the day slip away completely. Let the sound of the crackling wood be the final sentinel guarding your mind as you drift deeper and deeper into rest, knowing that this warmth is ancient, this darkness is safe. The stories will wait for us, always.
But sleep comes first. A deep, good, restful sleep. Sleep now. Sleep well. Until the next time we meet. Under the silent watch of the firelight. He slipped through the grasp of the British net. The message already carried by the wind. Dr. Samuel Prescott, the quiet, forgotten writer, knew the urgency, knew the route. He rode faster now, past Lexington, past the field where the gathering darkness awaited the dawn. His horse breathing heavy, rhythmic puffs of steam, a phantom in the cold, dark hours. The central mission had failed in its capture, but the network was robust, unstoppable.
A spider web spun across the Massachusetts landscape. Every crossroads, every tavern, every hamlet held a relay. As Prescott pounded toward Concord, the sounds of distant alarms began to rise. Not the single frantic cry of one man, but the swelling chorus of many voices. Bells tolling softly in far-off steeples, a somber, beautiful sound carried on the frost. Israel Bissell, riding south toward Worcester, had already passed the message to relays, Wadsworth and Lincoln, and dozens more anonymous riders whose names are lost to history. They melted into the darkness after delivering their crucial word, their only reward, the safety of their towns. The genius of the Sons of Liberty was not relying on any single star, but illuminating the entire sky, a diffused light of warning spreading everywhere at once. Imagine the fields waking slowly, the farmer pulling on his boots, hearing the shouted warning, the glint of musket barrels being carried out of barns, the quiet understanding that the hour was here. The moment they had prepared for years had arrived. The firelight of those early morning lanterns cast long, trembling shadows on the walls of homes, a silent confirmation that war was creeping closer. The British troops, marching slowly, methodically, their redcoats a dark smudge against the awakening land. But the colonists knew the redcoats were coming, thanks to the quiet heroism of the relay riders. Prescott delivered the final warning to Concord, and then vanished into the deep shadows of history, his work complete, his duty fulfilled. The darkness was filled with the sounds of preparation, the distant rattling of wagons, the quiet murmur of men. The revolution was awakened not by a single legendary ride, but by a chorus of anonymous hoofs.
This knowledge, the true story of the ride, the network, the resilience.
The decentralized warning brings us back to the firelight itself, the warmth that protects us from the unknown darkness, the ancient comfort, the deep security. We remember the legend, the single bright flame, but we honor the entire network, the slow-burning embers that kept the heat alive through the long, cold night. They ensured the dawn of a new day. And now, as the story settles deep within you, we turn our attention fully back to the hearth, to the slow, mesmerizing magic of the fire. We let the history fade softly like mist and allow the sounds of comfort to take hold. This has been Nazrella, welcoming you to the end of this journey, a journey into the slow, persistent rhythm of the past. Listen now to the deep breath of the fire. It inhales the cold air and exhales the warmth. It draws you in, slowly, gently, securely. Feel the immense warmth spreading outward from the logs, a soft golden shield against the night. We sit here together, embraced by the ancient light, the light that guided the riders, the light that calmed the fearful, the light that invites only safety and slumber. The fire crackles softly, a gentle conversation with itself, a whisper of wood turning into ash, turning into memory. The sounds are deep and comforting, the subtle hiss of sap boiling within the oak, the sudden bright snap of a dried branch giving way, a rhythmic, steady sound that anchors your mind. Your body is heavy now, sinking softly into the chair or the bed. The stresses of the day, they dissolve like smoke. They are lifted effortlessly, carried away on the gentle draft. You are here now, entirely safe, entirely warm. The orange glow washes over you, a deepening hue. It slows everything. Down, down, down. The pace of your breath slows, matching the gentle burn. Inhalation soft and long. Exhalation even softer, even longer. You are drifting now on the currents of the firelight. This fire tonight is the hearth of history. It holds all the stories, all the quiet movements, all the brave whispers of the forgotten riders. But those thoughts are far away now, just faint embers. All that remains is the simple, beautiful reality of warmth, the quiet security of the flame. It asks nothing of you. It demands nothing. It only offers peace, deep, enduring peace. Allow your eyelids to grow heavier and heavier, a delicious weight pulling them down, down. The light behind your eyes softens to a deep ruby red, a color of rest, a color of profound stillness. You are ready now to release the day, ready to sink into the beautiful dark quiet of sleep. The fire will watch over you all through the night, a faithful companion, a silent guardian. Sleep now, sleep deep, sleep well, until the soft light of the morning finds you. Good night, good night, good night.